I still look at myself. I'm not just the basketball coach. I mean, there's so many other interests and hobbies that I have, and I think that's an important part of the growth, is knowing that that doesn't define me. It's not just who I am, but all the other things help me be a better coach too.
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the triumphs and the trials of their chosen fields. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, athletes, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Hey everybody, welcome back to this edition of the Beautiful Work Podcast. We've got a great interview today with a friend of mine and a fantastic men's basketball coach, Dr. Oliver Eslinger from Caltech. And before we get to his interview and his story, which is fantastic, a couple of quick announcements. If you could and have not already, subscribe to the podcast on Apple iTunes or Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you happen to listen. That just helps it continue to grow, as well as pass this along to other folks that you think might like this type of deep dive conversation type of setting podcast. Really does help it continue to grow. We have a fantastic loyal following that I'm so appreciative of, and it's because of you guys sharing it and passing it along that we've really developed this community, and so I appreciate that and hope you guys will continue to do so. Quickly, on the music front, I do have a new record set to come out here in a couple of months. It's a live record from last summer's Orange County Fair shows. The band and I had a 5-night stretch at the Orange County Fair, and we recorded every night and then put it all together into a live record, 24 songs. And so that is coming out here sometime in the summer. So please check out dankrikorian.com for all the music, podcast, and other news. Also, I started a YouTube channel with my buddy who coaches in Europe called Slappin' Glass, and it's a informative coaching YouTube channel. So if you're a coach listening to this and want all the top European plays and sets that you could ever want, please check out Slappin' Glass on YouTube. All right. Well, my guest today, Dr. Oliver Eslinger, as I mentioned, the head coach at Caltech. And before Doc took over in 2008, Caltech was more known for their unbelievable losing streak as a program. And since he's taken over in 2008, they have become more than just a competitive program. They've become one of the top programs in college basketball. The way he leads and the way that he runs his program is second to none. He was named the SCIAC Men's Basketball Coach of the Year this year in our conference, and pleasure having him, and I'm lucky to call him a friend. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Doc. Before we get into all the basketball stuff, I know you're a guitarist. I know you play. How's that coming along in quarantine? Are you getting some time to play, or is it all basketball and family life?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have kind of a different schedule and structure these days, and so being behind our walls is a good thing for the musically inclined, I guess, because we have a number of instruments. And I mean, my wife's a really good pianist, even though she won't admit it, trained classical, piano player. And then our son is 9, and he's taking piano lessons too. And his teacher's pretty amazing in what they can do via Zoom these days. I mean, he's still getting lessons. And in fact, the other day, our son, I mean, I think he kind of got sidetracked from the piano, and they were learning a Coldplay song, but Then he picked up the ukulele that was at his feet, and so his teacher started going through the ukulele. But anyway, that said,
That's good.
we try to listen to music and play music every day, and certainly I have a number of guitars here, and so I try to pick them up as much as I can whenever there might be a free moment, and start picking or strumming or whatever is on my mind.
Now I know you and I have talked, and you're into kind of finger picking, that kind of stuff, correct? Or who do you listen to? What kind of stuff do you like to play?
It's everything. I just whatever maybe hit me in that moment, or if I heard something earlier, if I'm listening to a new musician or new song I never heard before. Um, if I'm, Dan Krikorian, he's a great one. So if I've been listening to him, I'm
Uh
getting
huh.
into that
Yeah, I
that
can say.
sort of that sort of deal. Um,
Thanks.
no, it's it kind of goes along with my philosophy, and what we'll probably get into here is just it's eclectic. So I mean, I think it's important to expand your universe and learn all different systems and styles. And so I kind of apply that to music as well. I think it was I think it was John Prine. I was listening to an interview the other day, and he started talking about how he wasn't good at playing anybody else's music, so he did his own. And that's kind of where I fall. I try to learn some things out there,
Yeah.
and that's certainly a good way to learn and try to model. But I really like to create my own.
So, do you have a bunch of like songs you've written, or do you have stuff stored up somewhere that we might get an album or something someday from
we,
you?
we we have both.
Uh huh.
Uh, there's a lot of scraps of paper in the guitar case with some what I think are good lyrics,
Uh huh.
but haven't been out there. But a buddy of mine, when I was living in Boston, he was in a pretty popular band uh, in the area, and they toured a little bit. And so I began to jam with him a bunch. And one year or one weekend in one of the years, he had moved to Philadelphia, and he's a violinist and played the electric violin bluegrass band.
Cool.
And so we had about 9 songs that we just sat up in his apartment that weekend and just recorded all day and all night. Now, back when it was, I think we put some of them on what was that the old older music site that was pretty
Um,
popular,
MySpace.
early two. Yeah, we put a few on MySpace,
Okay. Yeah.
and so you could probably reach them there, but I'm not even sure if that's still if it's still available.
Do yeah, I think, man, that brings back a lot of memories because I know I put my first stuff out on MySpace, and that was like the go-to place if you wanted to release your music and build a following. Do your players know that you play?
I think some of them do. We've definitely talked about it either during the recruiting process when we're trying to build a relationship there,
Sure.
or even later. I mean, we do have a lot of students and student athletes that are musicians or took piano or grown up because it just kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with the way their minds work. So I do try to talk about music with them.
Yeah, I've always found it personally to be a nice kind of connecting point for, like you said, recruiting or for just the guys on our team. I'm not always, guys kind of find out slowly, and then it's always the fun day when I come into the gym and they have a YouTube video playing of me and saying, coach, this is you, and then they like to blast it or blare it on the loudspeakers in the gym, which is always fun. But I always feel like just adds another element of stuff that we can go into as a player
Right.
coach relationship that I enjoy personally quite a
Right.
bit.
Yeah, I think if there's ever a way to just show that you're more than
Yeah,
just a basketball coach, which certainly you are, and I am. I just think to be able to show that human side
yeah,
and be able to connect in as many ways as possible. I mean, we have to try to stay hip too,
that's right.
and but also show that, I mean, basketball can create a lot of connections, but certainly music does. I mean, talking about a universal language.
Yeah, I mean, and you can add to this too because you play and um, are a musician yourself. Just I get always asked a lot like, well, music and basketball is so different. How do you kind of exist in both worlds? And I, I don't really feel that different in either one. I think that, picking up a guitar and playing, learning the structure of chords, learning, a skill set is very similar to building a team or to practicing a skill in basketball. Do you feel the same way that kind of they go hand in hand in a sense?
I think it's the same. It's the same kind of thing going. I mean, there's a what I and you'll probably appreciate this. I mean, one of my phrases that I like to say is make music, not noise, when I'm coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So we might be at our one of our academies or in practice, and things can get sloppy out there, at times. And so then I'll run the parallel, I'll run the metaphor of uh, about building music, building a composition together. And so we've got to have harmony
Mm-hmm.
within the group, and then there's also a freedom that's established. And this kind of goes into my coaching philosophy: is you have a structure, and you get everyone to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish as a team. But then the great thing about basketball and the great thing about music is it's a jam session too. So
Yep.
everybody's going to get his or her turn out out on the court, or if you're in the music lab. And so you've got your harmony going, but when you go off and kind of do your own thing, the freedom, then you've got your melodic tones and whatever it might be that goes along with you, one's
Sure.
melody. So
I very much appreciate that, and I think it's a great reference. And I think um, I have a 7-piece band, and it's very similar to organization of your team. And everybody can't be the lead singer, but the bass is just important, and the drum keeping people together. And it's a nice little metaphor, I think, for when you're talking to kids about you know trying to be a star in their role. Let's transition a little bit. I wanted you to take me back to the fall of 2008. You just get
okay,
hired. You just get hired as the head
sure.
coach at Caltech. You beat out hundreds of people for this job. And if you can remember, your mindset at the time coming out here, what the first few weeks were like after you took that job, coming from the East Coast where you were an assistant at MIT at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 12 years ago, which is even crazy to think about because I've lived in a bunch of places, but now I've lived in California for more than any of them. I was in Boston for 10 years and Massachusetts for 14, if you count Clark University, where I went to undergrad. And then I was in Oklahoma for 9 years growing up before we moved to New York in high school. So I've been around a little bit, but I think back to 2008 a lot, and just making that transition. That's a pretty big time transition when you go from one coast to the other and not really knowing what to expect. And literally you're taking over the worst college basketball program that ever existed, you know, um, at least for decades. I mean, 1954, they did win the championship, but
Right.
um, when I was at MIT, and I remember going on a bus trip, and I think we're going down to Coast Guard, and that's about a 2-hour drive from Cambridge. And somebody threw in, we had Quantum Hoops, the documentary on Caltech, and that's really the first time I knew anything about Caltech, and that was a few years, I think. Maybe it wasn't a few years before getting here, but it was before here, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, there's an interesting history there. And so then when the job opened, I remember my wife now, we were up at a wedding in Seattle, and I saw it on D3 Hoops.
Mm-hmm.
Coach was leaving, and you get those gut feelings, and also coming from MIT, I just knew it was going to be the right position for me.
Yeah.
So I just knew I was going to get it. Even though I go through the whole interview process, I wasn't. There was no guarantee,
Sure.
but you just had that gut feeling. So think back to 2008. I mean, I was excited. I was anxious, uh, but I looked at it as just with optimism, like I usually do, and trying to take on a challenge and embrace that. And it was just going to be an adventure. And so coming out here for the first time, my wife was still. I mean, she was my fiance at the time, and she was finishing grad school over at Tufts. And so I was here alone for a while, and I was able just to focus
Hmm.
on the job, and that was a good thing. I didn't have to worry about anything extra at that point.
So when you first arrived, you're taking over a program like you said that, I mean, at that point was winless in decades, in the SCIAC for sure. Obviously, a win would come a few years later. But who were some of the first people on campus or outside of campus that you reached out to try to start building a relationship with to get things moving in the direction that you wanted?
Yeah, I mean that's good. That's what you have to do when you have your vision, and you've got to get some people who can be champions of that vision, and you can really connect with immediately. One of the first things I did was walk over to the alumni house just to try to make a connection there, and get a list of an updated list as much as they could provide of who's played here before and who can I reach out to and what kind of contact information do we have. It
Uh-huh.
wasn't a complete list, but it was a good enough start. And so that was one way, just start reaching out to alumni, but internally, I guess within campus, one of the people on the search committee was Dr. Robert Grubbs, and he's one of our Nobel Prize winners. He won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2005,
Wow.
and about 6'7", from Kentucky. Uh,
Okay.
never didn't play basketball past high school, but his daughter played at Yale, and then I think she coached later and maybe played some pro. And then he had two sons who were water polo athletes. Anyway, he loves basketball, so he was a guy I could connect with immediately too, and kind of instant respect when you're talking to a Nobel laureate.
Yeah, right, for sure. Now, it's so interesting, you know, just that maybe that first month or so, um, I don't know if people just appreciate the work you've done to get Caltech where it is now, but when you get there in 2008 and you're sitting in that new office, do you remember some of the first things you were saying, okay, I have to get this done, or I need to go do this, or I need to go do that? Like, do you remember some of the more, I guess, administrative things that were high priorities on your list?
Well, I knew I needed a staff,
Mm-hmm.
so that was one of the other things that was high priority. So assembling a staff that was going to work hard and I could trust. And then two was connecting with the current players and trying to figure out who would be returning and who might not be returning, and then figuring out who are really the leaders. Now, one of Travis Hausler he was going to be a senior, and he was also on the search committee, and I immediately connected with him, right away, and so he was a proponent and a champion too. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
had a say in kind of who was hired, and he's just such a great guy and a great man now, and still a huge supporter of us. But yeah, it's the getting the understanding the players, and then figuring out, hey, are there any new players coming in? I think anytime one takes over a program, that's what
Yeah,
he or she has to do is figure out where's the core, and
sure.
what do we do with this?
I'm interested because, well, how you get to Caltech and for so many years it was sort of like I said, when I played there at that time, to be up 30, 40, or 50 points in the first half was not uncommon for most Division three schools against Caltech in the say the 90s. Um, how do you start to try to find the world's smartest kids? I mean, the world, and we're talking about the top of the 1% smartest kids in the world. That are also good basketball players. I mean, was that something that you had some experience at MIT, obviously being there, so you've been dealing with those kind of kids, but now you're dealing with then also trying to get them to come to a program that's not winning. Um,
Right.
what was that process like? You figuring out how to start to reach out and find those kids, and then eventually recruit them to come play.
Yeah, well, like you said, I mean, and I've said before, we do have the whole world, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ideally, you'd have 12 to 14 or 15 on a team.
Yeah.
So if we can think about it that way, it's not that difficult.
Okay. I like how you
That's
phrase
how
it. Yeah.
that's how
Yeah.
that's how I convince myself.
Uh huh.
But that being said, it's still a highly selective institution and rigorous.
Yeah.
But I knew that coming from MIT,
Yeah.
and even though MIT is a bit larger as far as the student population, it's still a similar type of student that we're identifying
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately recruiting and trying to trying to learn about. So, but that's just the mindset we have to have. Every program has its challenges for sure. I mean, we're not the only one that has challenges in that, and it's just about embracing the challenge and figuring out how do we continue to build, how do we get 3 to 4 good players every year. And obviously, I mean, this isn't something that happened until even. I mean, there's stages of it.
Right.
So when I was hired, when I came in, I mean, I started in late August 2008 or September 2008, somewhere in there. I think I arrived on campus in September. So it wasn't like there was a lot of time to put together
Mm-hmm.
a class, but we were fortunate. I mean, we still had some interest even at that time, and we were able to bring in a pretty large class in that first cycle. I mean, in that class was the first guy I ever recruited was Michael Edwards, and he ended up being, I mean, he's the all-time leading scorer
Right.
at Caltech, and even though he and his group didn't win a lot, on the scoreboard, I mean, they won in a number of areas as far as what we were looking for to be successful and improve and develop. So they Mike really and his partners there really set the stage for what's happening now. I mean,
Yep.
we talk about leaving that legacy and the legacy left behind. I mean, they made the program better, and they were the toughest. That was just the toughest group of guys I've ever been around.
And you say toughness, and that's a word that I would definitely use as an opposing coach to describe, playing against you guys. You always know you're in for a 40-minute tough, hard-nosed battle when you play against a Caltech team coached by you. Um, is that something from the beginning back in 2008? Was that a pillar? Was that something philosophy-wise that was always
Yeah,
with you? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I like to coach in metaphor. I like to coach with stories, and I like developing acronyms and figuring out new terminology that will really work for that group or sustain itself. And so I don't know when I thought of it, but in 2008, I said we're all going to get our PhDs in basketball. PhD, play hard and develop.
I like that.
And so that was kind of our mantra going into it. We knew, I mean, we had the expectations. We knew we weren't going to win maybe at all, but we were going to play hard and we were going to develop and we were going to do it by grit and that kind of mental and physical toughness and inviting. I mean, I tried to convince our guys, hey, we know teams are going to press us. That's a good thing because
Mm-hmm.
we'll get our press attack going and we'll get some buckets.
Right,
You know,
right.
and I remember one of the first practices, one of the guys just was thinking I was crazy by saying that, but
Yep.
you have to figure out how to get through and build some confidence too. So that's what we went with those first couple of years, and the very first season. I mean, we won a game, and we had some pretty pretty competitive moments, at least in the non-conference. I mean, at that time, the SCIAC was so far really out of our reach, but it was more. It wasn't even that, you know. It was more mental than anything
Hmm.
because when I came in and I had our first practice, we had our first practice. I actually thought, wow, I knew some of the guys before that, but I said these guys are actually a lot better than what people think. It was just a matter of getting over that mental hump or hurdles or however you want to look at it. And I knew that's how that's how I sold it too. And just in getting the job was just the sports psychology background and being able to utilize aspects of the mental game that I knew were going to be important as we progressed.
You take over, and there's these few years where you're starting to build a program and get guys in that you're recruiting, and kind of lay the foundation. And like you mentioned, difficult times obviously with not winning a lot, but feeling like you're making some progress. Now comes February 22nd, 2011, and you guys, after 310 game losing streak in the SCIAC, you beat Occidental. And it seems like the world kind of explodes where you guys are ESPN, New York Times, I mean, Sports Illustrated, NPR, everybody's doing articles on you guys, and it's this really big story. Can you take me back to that moment, to when the buzzer sounded and you guys had beaten Occidental for that first win, what that felt like, and then kind of some of the stuff that surrounded it, what that was like?
Yeah, and that was, I mean, still thinking back to it, the good thing is there was so much media attention that I can easily go back and read
Mm-hmm.
about it in a number of sources, some of those that you mentioned, and that's really fun. And I it's part of, as a coach, I like to reflect and review how did we get to where we are, and that's part of it. And I mean, I still remember the feeling in that gym going into that game and just knowing we were going to get this done somehow. We just had to get it done in that
Mm-hmm.
last game in Ryan Almquist's senior year. Somehow this is going to happen. Didn't know exactly how, but we had been so close that season in so many games.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there, at least one overtime game against Redlands and maybe another one. And I think there were 6 or 7 games where there were single digits. And that's where that mental component came in. It was just we couldn't find a way. I mean, there was one game against my good friend at Laverne and Rich Reed's team, and it was just a back and forth battle. And we missed a couple free throws at the end that would have sealed it, and then we dribbled off our foot, and then we slipped trying to close out. I mean, things like that were
Yeah.
happening. Like, what's going on in the basketball universe?
Yeah.
So it was it was just a magnificent moment, and really can't write it better any other way. And some of the writers talked about how it could be a movie script,
Yeah.
and just in being the last game of the season. And it's just nuts to think about how we did that.
When you got up the next morning and you went back to the office, um, was it a sense of relief, or was it a sense of like, was it like an ending point for you, or was it a jumping off point for you?
I mean, if you've ever experienced euphoria in some way, and I'm sure you have, whether it's in music and
Uh
playing
huh.
to a big crowd, over in Europe or whatever, or hiking
Mm-hmm.
a big mountain, or whatever sense that challenges, it doesn't wear off for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially because it was the last game, it wasn't like we had to prepare for another game or go watch video or anything like that.
Right.
So it lasted for months. I
That's
mean, it
great.
lasted through the summer. So I could go back when I go recruit out east during the summer, and then everyone's heard about it.
Yeah.
It's actually good thing to talk about. But that night, I mean, I didn't go to bed till very late that night or early the next morning, and I think I had about 3 hours of sleep. And after any win, it's hard to sleep,
Sure.
and after any game, it's hard to sleep for whatever reason you might have, but especially that one. But we had media coming at us, and the New York Times had done a story on us earlier that season. John Branch, Pulitzer Prize winner. And so they did something on us in December, I believe. And so he was kind of my first contact because we had already known each other from before. And I remember him calling me or emailing me or one of those, I think both, and talking to him, really early in the morning. But when I went back to the office, I didn't go back to the office because there was a huge press conference in the gymnasium in Braun Gym. I mean, the place was just set up, very professionally. Our staff did a great job putting that together. And we had so many reporters there from all over the place. And I mean, it was press row, So it wasn't your normal day going back to the office after a win. That's for sure.
Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." To fully appreciate the transformative work that Doc has done at Caltech over the past 12 years, a little context and perspective is necessary. Before Caltech's victory on February 22nd, 2011, they had lost 310 straight conference games. That's over 26 years of conference losses in a row. And for much of the time, the margins weren't close. 30 and 40-point losses were just as common as single-digit losses. Now, there are major sport franchises who go long stretches without winning a championship. But to go decades without winning one game is something different. So the celebration and national media attention that ensued after their win was justified after such a historic night. And as Newton's third law states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, I have no doubt that the sweetness of that win lasted far past the next morning. But as sweet as that win was, the continued growth of the program since 2011 has been just as impressive. Doc and Caltech have steadily climbed and become one of the most formidable teams in the conference. And Doc is known as one of the hardest working, meticulous, and creative head coaches around, constantly striving for new ways to improve both himself and his program, and shows no signs of slowing down. As Confucius once said, "It does not matter how slowly you go, so long as you do not stop." You talk about stories and coaching in stories and using that to build your team and your program. So after you get that first SCIAC win, the story for so long was recruiting your guys, building the program, getting to that point. And then now, let's fast forward a little bit now, and you guys are one of the most competitive teams year in, year out in the conference. You guys go 9-7 this year. You've got a first team all conference player. You're coach of the year in our conference. Congratulations again. You know, from that 2008 fall where you take over to now, has been such a 180 with the program. How have you changed, and how is that story changing with you and the guys?
Well, that's the ultimate question, and if I have an answer, I mean, this is a book right here. So, I mean, as far as personally changing, I mean, I'm just a better coach than I was 12 years ago. And that's part of, I mean, that's growth mindset and all that we talk about nowadays, but that's how it's always been for me before people were using that term.
Mm-hmm.
Just how do I look at myself and get better? You know, that's what I'm trying to do, striving for every day is how do I get better as a coach, as a teacher, as an educator, as a father, as a family man, as a husband, as a musician,
Mm-hmm.
as a reader, as one who wants to practice, desires practicing mindfulness. People who practice mindfulness wouldn't say we desire it, because if we desire it, that creates suffering. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a lot of layers to it,
Yeah.
but I'm definitely a better coach just because of being in the SCIAC. Really, I mean, we we have a number of coaches in our league who have been here for more than 2 decades who have 300, 400 wins. I mean, I know we don't get the notoriety. People don't even know that we have this going. But when we're talking about how do I learn, and how am I mean, like, what kind of music do I like? You know, who am I? It's about learning from others and taking their best criteria and trying to incorporate that
Mm-hmm.
into what I'm doing. So I've learned something, and this is the same way I approached basketball growing up. It was never just I mean, it was a point guard, shooting guard. It was never just watch this specific John Stockton. I mean, I grew up a Bulls and Michael Jordan fan, and in Oklahoma too, because we had WGN. I mean, that's
Mm.
what I watched. Superstation, you know, from
Yeah.
Chicago. So it was, what can I take from that? What can I take from him and learn? So that's the way I always look at it. Yeah, it's a blend of everything, and so that's helped me become much better. I mean, if I knew now when we say this, if I knew now in 2008, I mean, if I knew then what I know now, then we probably get that win earlier, you know, in that season.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just part of it, and that's part
Sure.
of the growth. And so, I mean, the second part of it, you asked about how's the team or how's the program different,
Yeah.
or right. So it's about the next step. Well, in 2008, the first step was just getting people to commit to what we were doing and come to practice every day. You know, we weren't going to miss practice for schoolwork anymore, and that had been traditionally what happened at Caltech,
Mm-hmm.
because it was just, that was the way it was done. So there was a step there, and then 2 years later there's another step, and then 2 years later there's another step. So now I mean, it's always been, we want to win. We know we want to win. We have that drive. No one wants to step on the court after 70 practices and lose a game. And so that's always there as coaches and players, but it's about doing it the right way. And so what I'm saying is that every coach in our league wants to win the league.
Right.
And so we want to win the league too. We've always said that. So, I mean, we want to be really competitive in the playoffs. We want to get there and be there, and we would like to experience the national tournament and advance in the tournament, and be playing in March. I mean, when you're talking about outcome goals,
Yeah.
that's what we
Yeah.
like to do. And then process wise, just it sounds simple, but it's just keep getting better. We just have to keep getting better.
Have you noticed a shift in, those your first 5 to 6 years of getting, and I've read this somewhere, where you have like a, become the evolution packet for your recruits, or something where you're getting these kids to become part of something that's different that people haven't done before at Caltech, um, and now you're recruiting kids that they're coming into a program that's having success and is ultra competitive. And have you seen a difference in the type of kids you're recruiting? Obviously, they're still the best students in the world, but do these kids have a little different mindset coming in to the program than they did, say, your first 6, 7 years?
I think the mindset is the same. It's just there's more of them, right? So we've each 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 level of success that we've kind of experienced, there's more there's more notoriety, there's substantial evidence that we really can compete with anyone in the country as far as basketball. And so it's easier to talk about that when we
Sure.
have the actual data, and we can say, hey, we've had two players now in our program that went and played professionally.
Yeah.
We've had a number of national awards, either staff wise or player wise. We have alumni that are working here and doing this, and then we can and then but ultimately, whether it's fair or unfair, people want to ask. They ask your record. They just always want to know your record. Nobody ever asks, hey, how was practice this week? you know, how did you
Right.
do? It's always about, did you win, and what was the score?
Right.
And so I've learned how to communicate that and have that dialogue in a way that becomes positive and inspirational, but also we can say, hey, focusing on the highlights. And and also, I mean, I think it's easier to talk about some of the lowlights maybe when we've had highlights. It's the whole yin yang thing. I mean, you can't have one without the other.
For sure.
So, hey, you guys are really good. Well, to be really good, it must have been you were really bad at one point too. So
Yeah.
it's just, you can't get like emotional with it. It's just it's just how it's been, and we're just talking about the evolution of it. And I do like to use that term. It goes along with the scientific community too
Sure. I'm sure that
that
plays well. Yeah.
that we're in. So it's just fun. It's fun to think about everything that we've done. And it's
Yeah.
taken longer. I mean, it's taken longer. When I in the beginning of the conversation, when I said the worst the worst team in the world, I mean, the reason I'm saying that is because it wasn't just that Caltech wasn't winning. It was like you mentioned, the scores were so lopsided
Yeah.
that there was just no chance. And why would somebody want to take over when you're seeing scores that are 100 to 50 or 90 to 40, and
And why
you're
did you?
losing to the third string,
Yeah.
it was uh I did it because I've always been the underdog, and embracing that and saying, hey, you'll never you know you'll never play in high school, right? You'll never play in college. I end up starting in college, and never. It kind of goes back to just the love for basketball and the challenges that go with
Sure.
it. And then, hey, you know, you're you you you're not smart enough to go get a doctorate, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And um, in Cambridge, when we were living in Boston, I mean, my wife and I are founding faculty members of a charter school, and the school, it was just starting out, and there wasn't even a building yet, and so we helped build a school. And so it's that kind of mentality. If we can do that and make it the best school in the state, which it is now, as far as charters, um, why can't we go to Caltech and establish something really special? It's
It's
going to be
great.
very unique. No one's ever done it before,
Yeah.
so let's blaze our own path that way.
What's some advice you might give your younger coaching self 12 years ago, just taking over a program, things that you know now that maybe you do differently or you do the same? Advice maybe for younger coaches or coaches at any level that are taking over their own programs and just starting out.
Well, I think the first thing would be, and it's easier to say now, but you have to be, you've got to trust yourself, and you've got to be yourself. And I probably didn't know who I was exactly 12 years ago as far as a head coach. I had been a head coach at a high school in Boston right before MIT, and that was only a year. And I certainly learned a lot just in that year. But you've got to trust what you know and go with what you know. And looking back at it, we did that. But I think over the years, because we can't just get anybody we want to come play for us.
Right.
And so a lot of people ask about, do you coach a certain system or you adapt to players? And my answer, it's both, but our system has changed depending on our players, and our players have changed depending on our system.
Right.
But it's about trying to blend it all together. I think sometimes early on, and even maybe 3, 4, 2, I don't know, recently, it's easy to get influenced by your staff. I mean, you want to have a staff who has great ideas, but even then, it's important that we stick to the core principles of what our values are, and that we continue to go with those. Stay the course. I like to say, just stay the course. We really have to. We got to make music, not noise, and don't listen to the noise outside the music we're trying to make. Because if you do that, then especially with social media and all this that's coming at you, there's so many distractions, and it's so important just to be focused on what I'm doing and what I can control and what I can possibly influence. So
That's
that's a
great.
philosophical way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And don't worry about, um, you can't worry about the fans and whatever they're saying, and and even on a day-to-day basis with players, because we do good things every day, but we also, as coaches, we make mistakes every day too. I just
Right.
think there's always a better way to do something and always a better way to say something. So there'll be times when I might come home from practice and, oh, we had a conversation, but I probably could have reached him in a better way. But if there's a doubt like that, what I would suggest to people is you pick up the phone and you call the person.
Mm.
You don't want to go that week or the next day with assuming that the fire will be put out,
Right.
however small it might be.
Yeah.
But connecting with the players by talking face to face or on the phone is a lot better than the texting and the Instagram.
Sure.
I mean, that's how
Right.
we can. I mean, I asked a question the other day to some players, and all I got was the thumbs up. Now, I don't know if that means they liked the question or it's a yes
Right.
to the
Right.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, still figuring out the communication with the texting and the younger generation is always a challenge. Coaches trying to keep up with for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I would say too, another piece of advice that even as a head coach, I can't be afraid to reach out for help. I
Hmm.
think some people think that they're head coach now, they have to have all the answers. And there are plenty of times where I don't have the answers, or at least I need to search and talk to someone who can at least reiterate that we're on the right track.
Right.
So the networking just continues to be so important. And I enjoy talking to the head coach that we're going to play against.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that has been great about our conference
Right.
over the years is sit down and talk to these guys before, and then we're gonna go play against each other. We're gonna play very hard and try to play well, and then after you shake hands, and then you're friends again and
Yep.
colleagues. And so that's the thing. I have not been afraid to when someone reaches out to me, hey, advice, yeah, I'll get right back to the person. They want advice from someone who's been in the seat now. But at the same time, I'm always reaching out to coaches all across the world for ideas.
And it's great, I think, for people to hear too. Some coming from someone that's a successful head coach at the college level. That it's how you continue to grow and learn and get better yourself. Um, you're a very smart guy. You could have probably gone into a million other careers. You got your doctorate and all that sort of stuff. Why coaching basketball? Why why go the sleepless night route of becoming a head college basketball
I
coach?
didn't mean to do it. It was an accident.
Okay.
I mean, look, basketball has always been that thing for me that was there. So, I mean, I started playing in fourth grade, organized in Oklahoma. But even before that, I remember watching the first ever college basketball game with my dad, Georgetown, Syracuse. And from the moment I saw that, and even my dad shooting in the driveway in Atlanta, where I was born, I still remember him shooting out there. And it just there was something about the sport that I loved. So it's always been there. When I went to grad school, I remember the first year when I went to get my master's at BU. I mean, I didn't touch a basketball for that whole year because it was just, it's hard for athletes to transition,
Hmm.
and we hear stories like that all the time. Even professional, I mean, they end up going bankrupt because they lose their identity.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was kind of in mourning that I wasn't going to play college basketball anymore, and I missed that part. But so I tried to dive into the studies again, and so I didn't touch it, but I would still watch it, but I didn't play. But then I started in the next year of grad school when I started my doctoral program. We found noon ball at BU, and there was a really good noon ball game. I started playing again,
Hmm.
and then those competitive juices came back. Then I ended up playing when I was in Boston, playing 4 or 5 nights a week in different men's leagues, just all around the city. And now I was still in grad school, but then like I said, I started coaching at that high school BU academy because they needed a boys coach. And I was working on my dissertation. The AD had played noon ball with us and worked there. So he asked if I wanted to coach. And so then when I started coaching again, because after Clark, I was an assistant at my high school at Bethlehem Central High School in Albany, and I helped those guys out. And I had worked summer camps. I mean, every summer, that's how I was making money. I was
Okay.
working basketball camp. So it's not like I wasn't doing that part. But then once Coach Anderson hired me at MIT, kind of out of the blue, uh, and I was there for 6 years. I mean, every year I liked it more and more. So I was doing the sports psych stuff,
Okay.
and I had some other jobs as I was putting it all together. But then I thought, you know what, I do want to coach. I do want to coach for a living. And so that's how it kind of happened. But it wasn't the grand plan. And I still look at myself. I'm not just the basketball coach. I mean, there's so many other interests and hobbies that I have, and I think that's an important part of the growth is knowing that that doesn't define me. It's not just who I am,
Sure.
but all the other things help me be a better coach too.
Yeah. I agree. Well, that's great. What's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
Investments. Well, if we're talking just just purely basketball, it's taking the time to go to other practices across the country and meet other coaches and check out programs. So I've been to a number of NBA training camps over the years. I've been to I went to Norman this past fall and spent some time with the OU basketball staff and at their practices and uh, and the department. Went to a football game there to see my Sooners, who I grew up cheering for.
Cool.
And I just think it's really important. I mean, even going to the NABC convention every year and connecting with coaches there and going to those clinics. I mean, that's certainly investment, not
Hmm.
not financially necessarily. I mean, a little bit there, but time wise, because it's time away from my family. So
Yeah.
it's sacrifice and investment in the craft. But I bought a number of books, though. I mean, I think I read so many books, especially in the off season, and I'm one of those guys who's reading like 6 or 7 or 8 at a time.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if you ask me what I'm reading right now, I probably can't even tell you because there's so many.
Right.
But that's an investment because I'm purchasing those books.
Any before I get to my last question for you on that book note, any that are, guiding light type of books for you that you recommend to people or coaches?
Well, Legacy is such a great one about the New Zealand All Blacks,
Yep. Kerr.
and it's one of those where you pick it up, you can't put it down, and
Hmm.
you're writing on every page,
Yep.
and it's talking to you. And and the other thing I do when I read a book and I really like it, I reach out to the author
That's cool.
and and connect with him or her that way and say, I really appreciate what you said here. How did you learn this or whatever? Um, just wanting to feed my brain some more.
Do you get a response most of the time?
A lot of the times I do. You'd be surprised.
That's great.
Be surprised. Um, the another one, and I had reached out to him, Kerr, the Legacy, and we had a nice back and forth. But another one that was great was it's called The Perfect Pass, and it's about the evolution of football and the air game, in football.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it turns out that author wrote an award-winning book about the American the American West and Native Americans and that whole story. One of those
Okay.
really famous stories, um, and that happened to be one of my dad's favorite books too. And it just turns out it was the same author, and so we ended up talking for an hour and a half one day about all that.
That's great. One of my classes I teach at Chapman, a sport and society class I teach, the one of the books that we read throughout the semester is Legacy by Kerr, and so I know that book well, and my class always loves it. I mean, a lot of students say after how great of a book it really is.
Right, right. The other one of my other favorites is David Halberstam's Playing for Keeps,
Okay.
and that's one. I mean, it's about the Jordan and the Bulls rise, and kind of goes well with the Last Dance going on right now.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's such a prolific writer, and every other book was a sports book with him. He was a historian, but then every other one's a sports book, and that one really talked to me too because he does a great job talking about the mental toughness that it took
Sure.
for them to establish themselves.
That's great. It's a good list of books there. I'll be sure to throw out for. Well, I know I'm going to check out that one for sure. So, my last question for you, in all that you do as a coach, what brings you the most joy?
Yeah, it's it's connecting with the people, and we realize that even more right now when we're isolated and quarantined.
Yeah.
I mean, it's today's Thursday, so tomorrow it'll be 8 weeks. I mean, tomorrow, Friday, it's been 8 weeks since our family's been
Yeah.
just at our house, basically. And you realize how, because I always knew that I need to be connecting and interacting with people on a daily basis. And then you realize it even more now.
Yeah.
It's something is completely missing from that part of our lives. I just enjoy being in the gymnasium with a player or a group of players and working on something and having them be open and confiding in me and me learning something from them and figuring out how to make them work better and what makes them tick because the same thing doesn't work for every person. You could say the same thing and go about the same technique and same style, same terminology for one guy, for one player, and he won't get it. So then it's about, what's that one key term that I can say, or what's that one skill that will kind of reverberate for
Mm-hmm.
him. And then when you have that moment, it's the same thing in psychology and counseling. When I'm consulting with a group, or counseling an athlete or a performer, it's what's going to work here in this conversation for the light bulb to go on.
Mm-hmm.
And as a counselor, a psychologist would say, and I'm not a licensed psychologist, so I can't call myself a psychologist, but as someone would say, our job is to put ourselves out of work.
I
I
like
mean,
that.
if we can help this client so much that
Right.
the person doesn't need us anymore, then we're putting ourselves out. Same thing. I look at that as a basketball coach too. I mean, we're not putting ourselves out of work that way, but we want to help that person so much that he knows he doesn't need us there.
Right.
He knows how to do it himself. She knows how to do it herself.
That makes sense. That's a great answer. Well, um, thanks so much for coming on today and sharing and being so open. I want to give you 5-10 sec or whatever amount of time it takes. Where can people follow you, follow Caltech basketball? Where can we point them to find you guys?
Oh, sure. I mean, you can always email me if you want to connect that way. I'm totally open to that. Just like when I try to reach out to others, but it's hoopitup@caltech.edu.
Okay.
Hoopitup@caltech.edu. That's the work email. And then on social media, you can follow me at Doc's Head Games on Twitter, and then Caltech basketball has its Caltech basketball Instagram, and Caltech hoops on Twitter, and Caltech basketball on Facebook.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. As someone that's a competitor in the conference, I do have so much respect for you and the program that you run, and seeing the growth of it over the last years I've been a coach and a player. It's been good. It's been really good for the conference. It really has been. I think the SCIAC's one of the best basketball conferences that people maybe don't always know about. You go watch any conference game in the SCIAC on any given night, and you're going to see a really well-coached, hard-played college basketball game. And so I thank you for coming on and for being so open about everything, and can't wait to see you back out on the floor, hopefully here in the fall.
Right. Let's cross our fingers that
Yeah.
we can get out there. And I mean, I'd like to thank you for hosting a great podcast. I mean, really wonderful setting that you create for your guests, and to thank Chapman Basketball and Coach Bukowski and your whole staff for making us better. I mean,
Appreciate that.
we make each other better, but certainly I've learned a lot from coaching against your program.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the Beautiful Work Podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, and pass this along to someone you like or don't like, whatever you want to do. But we appreciate it. So until next time, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. See you soon.